Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all our colleagues and invitees. Welcome to the ASEAN Forum, Boosting Constructive Capital Investments in Agriculture, Education, and the Digital Economy. Today's event, as well as yesterday and tomorrow's event, as the ASEAN Forum, is hosted by the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, or CIPS, which is an independent think tank that advocates for policy reformations to create a free and prosperous Indonesia. One of our main policy areas is on food security and agriculture, which we'll be discussing a lot today. You can download our papers on food security policies for free on our website, www.cips-indonesia.org. My name is Felipa Manta, and I'm the head of research at CIPS, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Today's forum, we are joined by think tanks, government representatives, civil society, and private sector in the ASEAN region to discuss policies and regional frameworks impacting the ASEAN region, specifically on investment openness in the agriculture sector. And as you can see, this is not the regular webinar, but rather a discussion forum. So we're hopefully wanting to hear your perspective, your questions, your insights as well to build on the discussion. I also just want to say hello to some familiar faces here. Ma'ana, hello, Mas Abe, Margot coming from the United States. We're happy to have you here, and hopefully we can hear your perspective as well from your experiences. So maybe just to give, just to get to know each other a little bit better, since we are gathering from all around the world today, we would like to ask for the audience to change your display name into your name and your country, so we know where you're coming from. And feel free to turn on your video as well, so we can also see your gorgeous faces. So just to give a background for today's discussion, today's session will be titled Avoiding Future Food Crises in ASEAN Through Investments in Agriculture. So this session will specifically analyze the ASEAN Integrated Framework for Food Security and Strategic Plan of Action, which is colloquially known as perhaps the AIFS, SPAFS, specifically on the impacts of constructive investments and private sector involvement in the food and agriculture sector to mitigate future food crises. Today's panelists are invited to share how they see private and public sector investments towards improving food security and resiliency, not just in Indonesia, but across the ASEAN region, and challenges of attracting constructive investments in the agriculture sector. As we all know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, food security was a challenge for many countries as people have lost their incomes and unable to afford nutritious food. Meanwhile, the agriculture sector is facing tons of challenges in terms of the production, the supply chain, and disruptions throughout the food system as well. So how can we make sure that the investments coming into agriculture sector and all of the private sector involvement will be useful and beneficial to increase and to improve the food system's resiliency? So to answer all of that question and more, in the session, CIPS will be presenting some of the findings and analysis based on our most recent research written by the participants of our Emerging Policy Leaders Program. So some of you may have been asking, what is the Emerging Policy Leaders Program, or the EPLP? The Emerging Policy Leaders Program is a capacity building program designed to support young policy analysts in starting their policy research career. So during the program, the participants get to conduct their own research under close supervision and guidance from CIPS researchers. So the policy paper that we're going to be discussing today is the culmination of the intensive research activities during the program this year. So today, we have invited our EPLP graduates, our researcher, and along with another speaker to share more information about the ASEAN Integrated Food Security Framework, and also how that might be improved to strengthen investments in the region. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have Aditya Alta, the head of the Food Security and Agriculture Research Unit at CIPS. And we also have Azizah Fauzi and Nisrina Nafisah, both of whom are our dear EPLP graduate who just finished the program, graduated the program, and now have joined the CHIPS research team full-time. So Azizah and Ninis have been working hard on the research paper, specifically looking at the ASEAN investment regulatory framework under supervision and mentorship from Adit, and we're quite excited to be sharing that with you to get your feedback and insights. Later on, we will also be joined by Mr. Suon Sophal, Director of Department of Public Relations and Promotion of Private Investment from the Cambodia Investment Board. Mr. Suon will be a little bit late, so perhaps we can start sharing our perspective and then we will welcome him a little bit later. Just to give you a background of the structure of today's meeting, first of all, we will invite my colleagues from CHIPS to co-present the results of our research paper just to open the discussion. And then later on, we will also have Mr. Suon Sophal giving a presentation from his experience in Cambodia. After the end of the presentation, we will invite the audience today to actively participate as we are going to share the floor with you during the discussion session. At any point during the discussion, if you have any questions to the panelists or if you want to express your ideas, you can ask the speakers directly by using the raise hand feature on Zoom, or alternatively, you can ask your questions or present your ideas on the chat box. So we look forward to gain additional information and insight from you during today's session, as your input and feedback would be valuable and will enrich our discussion. So without further ado, I'm sure we're all excited to hear and to start the discussion. I would like to invite Adit, Azizah, and Nisrina to open our discussion today. So you have 15 minutes and the Zoom is yours.
Sure. Thank you and good morning, Philippa. Right. Yeah. Good morning to all panelists who at this stage are my colleagues. Yeah, hopefully our guest speaker will be joining us in a moment. Yeah, we are really glad to have you here, and I'm also extending my most happiest welcome to all participants who are joining us from across the region and also from other countries as well. So this study that was written primarily by my colleagues here, Azizah and Nisrina, this is actually one of our first forays into a regional issue, where traditionally, as an organization, we focus on food security in Indonesia. It's a preliminary desk study and document analysis of the ASEAN Integrated Food Security Framework and a strategic plan of action. And so in this meeting, we would very much welcome your perspectives from all participants in this forum regarding food security and investment in Southeast Asia. So I will just provide a brief introduction, and the rest of the findings and analysis will be presented by the two main authors. Next slide, please. Right. Why is food security an important issue in Southeast Asia? So to begin with, as you can see there on the chart, the prevalence of stunting in Southeast Asia has steadily declined over the last 2 decades. However, judging from the latest figure, slightly below 30%, this is still considered high under UNICEF's joint child malnutrition estimates. So actually the Global Nutrition Report sources its data from UNICEF. Some countries, Indonesia notably, have a stunting prevalence of over 30%, which is considered very high. Now, at the same time, prevalence of overweight has steadily increased. In 2020, it reached 7.5%. That is categorized as medium. Meanwhile, wasting, if you can see there, there's a tiny yellow dot just above the overweight line. In 2020, it sits at 8.2%. That's also considered medium. Now, for some countries in the region, again, Indonesia notably, the prevalence for overweight and wasting is above 10% of children under 5, which is considered high. Now, what does it tell us? It tells us that there is a dual problem of undernutrition and overnutrition in Southeast Asia, which is related to food availability and dietary diversity as part of food security. Yeah, next slide, please. Now, at the same time, the prevalence of stunting and wasting in Southeast Asia is respectively higher than the global average. These challenges are also likely to get worse in the future as climate change, supply chain disruptions, as we are bracing ourselves for a future crisis. These can affect agriculture production and food trade, and in turn, make the issue worse. Yeah, next slide, please. So the ASEAN has adopted the AIFS and SPAFS for the period of 2021-2025, which extends the coverage period of the previous documents. Now, like many other ASEAN documents, these framework and plan of action, they're not legally binding, and they function more as a guideline or recommendations for cooperation in food security. Here we focus on strategic thrust 5 on encouraging greater investment in food and agriculture. And we also consider the ASEAN Ray or the ASEAN guideline on responsible agriculture investment, and to what extent the principles on transparency and accountability have been reflected in the food security investment framework. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this presentation will assess whether these documents are enough to direct and regulate capital inflows into the region in order to solve food security by promoting cooperation equally involving all stakeholders and also public-private partnership. Yeah, and for that, I'm passing it over to the respective authors, Nisrina.
Thank you, Adit. Good morning, everyone. Allow me to continue the presentation by defining the term constructive and corrosive capital that we use in our paper to indicate the quality of investment that should be generated to improve food security. Next slide, please. Okay, so we refer to the concept of constructive and corrosive capital that was established by CIPS to analyze to what extent the framework attracts good quality investment. In this case, constructive capital is investment flows that have transparent and market-oriented objectives, both at the funding source and destination country. They generate capital that increase positive spillovers to the institution or government in which they operate, and they also encourage good governance practices. While corrosive capital, on the other hand, is investment flows that are not managed with transparency, and they have objectives that are based on vague political motives. So the capital generated from corrosive investments are often used to negatively influence the development of the destination country, such as through corruption and land grabbing. Therefore, it is important to ensure that the investment flows in the agricultural and food sector generate positive spillovers so that the region, the ASEAN region, can achieve food security. Next slide, please. In general, investment for food security is made in the agriculture and food sectors. This can take the form of domestic or foreign investment, but our paper focuses on foreign domestic investment, or FDI, from private sectors. There are two main reasons why FDI from private sectors are needed to achieve food security in ASEAN. So the first reason is that public resources are limited, or government resources are limited. Meanwhile, Southeast Asia's population is projected to increase in the future, and this would mean there will be more people to feed. And to feed a growing population and anticipate food security threats such as climate change, more investment will be needed. Such investment can be gained through collaborative public and private partnership agreements that needs to also be inclusive of small-scale farmers, small-scale investors, and indigenous communities. The second reason to why FDI is needed is that positive spillovers from the FDI that are in the form of knowledge and technology transfers have the potential to help ASEAN strengthen its economy and regional food security through capacity building of human resources and technological innovation. In addition to that, according to OECD, international investment could also increase an economy's productive capacity, helps create jobs, increases incomes, as well as stimulates domestic investment by developing connections with local suppliers. These potential effects from FDI are increasingly needed for the economic recovery of the ASEAN member states from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So in the long term, the impact of technology transfer from FDI can make food distribution more efficient by enhancing food traceability, transparency, and control of information flow within the supply chain. And the knowledge transfer can also improve the capacity of domestic workforce, as well as boost for innovation in the practices of agricultural and food sectors. Spillover effects, such as what I've mentioned, can increase overall food security through improved production quality and capacity. And they can also improve logistics system for a more efficient distribution of quality food, even among smallholder farmers. To improve ASEAN food security and economic growth, FDI should aim to eradicate the root causes of hunger and poverty, which aligns with the approach adopted in the ISSPAFS, or in the framework that was just mentioned. Therefore, investment policies need to be governed by a transparent and accountable legal framework at the domestic level, while also involving the private sector and stakeholders who are most vulnerable to hunger and poverty, such as the small-scale farmers. Next slide, please. So there are both challenges and opportunities for the prospects of FDI to assist ASEAN with to achieve their long-term regional food security. Some of the opportunities come from the relocation of manufacturing firms out of China and other parts of Asia due to the effect of trade disputes between the United States and China that still lingers today, but this time the reshoring or relocation of companies is further affected by the Great Lockdown during the pandemic, and also the growing income levels in China that can increase the cost of production. Other opportunities also include the increasing number of free trade agreements ASEAN member states ratified, such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, which provides the member states with more opportunities for investment. However, despite these opportunities, there are still challenges faced by the ASEAN member states that may hinder them from optimally reaping the benefits from FDI for food security. My colleague Azizah will continue to explain the challenges to investment in food security in ASEAN and highlight to what extent has investment-related provisions in the ASEAN frameworks, ISSPAFS, provided the push for constructive capital governance in agriculture and food in the region, given the existing challenges. Azizah, the screen and time is yours.
Now, going over to the challenges, as with anything else, the ongoing pandemic is a challenge to investment in ASEAN food security. We will see on the next slide that when the pandemic hits, there is a declining trend of FDI inflow, particularly to the agriculture sector in ASEAN countries. Furthermore, state-owned enterprises, or SOE's dominance in most ASEAN member states' agriculture sector is also a challenge. Quoting from CIPS policy paper on FDI in Indonesia's agriculture, these SOEs can drive off potential private sector investments. They are backed by the state and are given government subsidies, which makes them less vulnerable to market forces. So these SOEs have favorable conditions, which may reduce competition. Finally, different member states of the ASEAN member states have discrepancies in investment standards and their liberalization policies. Now, as I mentioned before, I will briefly talk about the impact of the pandemic of FDI in ASEAN agriculture. As you can see from the graph on the left, FDI in the agricultural sector in ASEAN during the pandemic was impacted severely. The last bar of the figure shows the total FDI inflow to agriculture in 2020, which, as you can see, is much lower than the average of the previous years. In addition to that, as you can see from the graph on the right, the share of total agriculture FDI inflow to ASEAN is already less than 10% of the total FDI inflows. This number is relatively small compared to the proportion of FDI to other sectors, such as manufacturing, financial, and insurance activities that reached 35% and 32% respectively. You can check further details in our upcoming paper. Next, please. Now, before we talk about the limitations and the gaps of the IFS SPAFS, let me briefly recap the purpose of this framework. Through this document, ASEAN indirectly promotes the development of a conducive investment environment through its strategic thrust. These include Strategic Thrust 2, which promotes conducive food market and trade, Strategic Thrust 7 and 9, which supports evidence-based food security and agriculture policies, Strategic Thrust 8 and 3, which supports integration of information on nutrition and food commodities. While through Strategic Thrust 5, IFS SPAFS attempts in increasing investment quantity to achieve food security by supporting the development of agri-based supply chain through stronger public-private partnership, or known as PPP. Now, over to the limitations that we identify in the paper. First, there is no direct emphasis to address the dominance of SOEs, which, as we argued earlier, is one of the challenges for FDI in agriculture in ASEAN. Furthermore, the evaluation of the framework is not publicly available. While there have been 2 versions of this framework before, both of them had no evaluation criteria that were easily accessible to the public. So it is unclear how progress towards achieving the goals of the framework is measured. Therefore, we believe that objective evaluation is important in order to enhance socialization of the framework and ensure its trackability. An additional problem that we outline is that the framework's provision have not put enough emphasis on strengthening a forum for exchange of investment knowledge and good practices between the ASEAN member states. And finally, we note that there is no harmonization of minimum investment screening standards and no willingness to liberalize investment. This is problematic, as in so far, we argue that achieving food security is one of the direct consequences to opening up trade to constructive foreign investment. Next, please. Yeah, next. So to conclude our presentation, we briefly mention our recommendations to alleviate the previously mentioned challenges and limitations of the IFS SPAFS provisions. Firstly, we propose to include provision on harmonization and commitment to FDI openness and standards for FDI screening in Activity 5.1.1. Furthermore, the evaluation of the provisions should be made transparent and accessible to the public in order to enhance the IFS SPAFS socialization roadmap and to help keep track of its progress. And finally, we propose to create a forum of exchange on knowledge and good practices to address the governance and capacity gap between ASEAN member states. This will help to create an enabling environment for the private sector's participation in the ASEAN agriculture sector. That's all from us. Thank you very much. We welcome questions and suggestions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Azizah, Nisrina, and Aditya, for starting off our discussion with the insightful presentation. You've really greatly covered and given the overview of what the IFS SPAFS is and how that might have implications on the region's food security as well. And I would like to invite audience, if you have any questions, feel free to already start posting them in the chat box. We will pick it up and then ask the panelists later on during the discussion. Likewise, if you have any thoughts or comments or insights that you want to provide, feel free to also share that in the comments. Next, we also want to welcome our other panelists for today's discussion, Mr. Suon Sophal, Director of Department of Public Relations and Promotion of Private Investment from the Cambodian Investment Board. I think Mr. Suon is already joining us. Hello, Mr. Suon. How are you?
Good morning from Cambodia. Thank you. We are doing good here.
Wonderful, great. So Mr. Suon will be presenting as well in terms of investments in food and agriculture from the Cambodian perspective. Mr. Suon, the next 15 minutes is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to express our appreciation to the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies for inviting me to share the Cambodia perspectives on how we promote investment in agriculture in the face that the region and the world meet the COVID-19 pandemic, and this time is really a great challenge for us. Cambodia have done a great deal to introduce a new policy to attract further investment, not only in agriculture, but in all economic sectors. But today I will share with you all of those policy from the point of view of policymakers. Is not the academia perspective. Perhaps it could also help all of you to understand where Cambodia position ourselves in promoting investment in agriculture, and also to mitigate the food security shortage somehow. Allow me to share my screen. I prepare a short presentation. I will share with you 2 points. One on the economic performance, just to share with you where we are now in terms of effort to maintain the GDP growth in Cambodia, and how investment and the agricultural development Cambodia shares in those economic growth. And the second point is a pro-business approach that we put in place to promote investment that I told you earlier, that the policy that we put, we adopt a pro-business approach for this respect. If we look at the...
Sorry, do you mind putting it on full screen and present?
You don't see the full screen?
We see it in the PowerPoint slides, but not in present mode.
Okay, let me try the other way.
Or if not, it's okay. We can also see the presentation well.
But you can see my slide moving, right?
Now we're seeing it in presenter mode. So we're seeing multiple slides at the same time. Okay.
This way you can see much bigger, right?
Yeah, this is bigger. Thank you so much, Mr.
Okay,
Suon.
okay. I have a problem with the technical issues when present this many times already, so sorry for that. We'll try to make it short in my presentation. If you see from these slides, I put all information from 2016 to 2022 as a projection that we make the effort to have a GDP growth with the target of 7% annually, but the COVID-19 have hit us severely in last year. So this year we expect to have 4% of GDP growth. The actual might be 2.4%. So it could be a promising for Cambodia economy to move forward. You look at the investment trend also last year, although the world FDI dropped to 40%, but Cambodia dropped only 12%. So we hope that this year we could bounce back to the level of before the COVID-19. But hopefully we can get more. Investment in agriculture, we see only 4%. That is, we will touch on how we can bring in more investment in agriculture. I think the previous speakers also mentioned of the COVID-19 impacts to the investment in agriculture sectors as well. So this is what Cambodia want to make it a policy that conducive for the agriculture sectors. When we promote the agriculture's investment, our approach is to apply a good agriculture practices in our policy. We encourage all the stakeholders to come together and have investment in agriculture to put all of those good agricultural practices, good animal husbandry practices, good aquaculture practice, manufacturing practices also there in terms of investment in food processing. We also introduce a hazard analysis and critical control point, and also the food safety system. At the end of our policies in agriculture's investment, we promote a eco agriculture. This is important because we want to improve human management of the land and natural resources. When we promote this, we have to provide a agricultural product and services on a sustainable basis. We ask a investment in these sectors to pursue something that is sustainable in these sectors. We ask them also to meet the goal that support viable livelihood of local people. Try to introduce a inclusive business approach that allow the big investment procure the product surrounding area that is benefit for the local people surrounding. The other goal that we also want agriculture investment to contribute to economic development and to conserve the full complement and native of a native biodiversities and ecosystem services around the area they invested. So this is something we want to ask a investment in agriculture to do, and look at the agricultural production and potential in Cambodia for export, that this also give an opportunity for investors to look into their futures investment. All of these chart, we see rice, we have more than 10 million tons. I think it's a good opportunity for those who want to invest in and processing rice itself. Mango, banana, coconut, logan, jackfruit, pineapple, durian, pomelo, dragon fruits, and this is the potential crop that we have in our economy that waiting for the investment in agriculture. Sorry. We also promoting the development of special economic zones, which we move all of those zones close to the area that the food processing could use as a location for their factory, and that location could serve a benefit of the local people producing agriculture product and then supply to the factory inside the special economic zone. So far, we have 58 special economic zone approved already for the development. 29 special economic zone are in operation. Most of them are along the Cambodia-Vietnam border, coastal areas, and Cambodia-Thai border. I think the way we put Azizah network along that borders is to capitalize the potential supply chain between this neighboring country with Cambodia manufacturing. So this is something we see the importance of promoting the special economic zone along the border to serve the benefit of those agricultural investment that produce for a raw material and production input for the other processing inside the special economic zone itself. When we promote all of those things, we adopt a pro-business approach, and our approach is very simple. When they come, we facilitate them, and when they meet a quality or qualify under our law, we provide incentive, and when they are in operation, we provide them with aftercare. So these three the approach that we put, hope that investors can feel warm, invest in our economy. The investment facilitation we provide to them when we approve investment project is less than within 28 working days. We will give them a single registration certificate. The investors can also apply for a online registration. We have called QIP online. That is a qualified investment project application we put online so that the investor can use this platform to get their paperwork done easily. On the registration certificate, we also put a barcode or QR code in that, making the company general information much easier for the other ministry agency that will go to help them in the aftercare process. This is something we don't want those government officials to ask for other relevant document, but they can just scan on the QR code and they will see the information that they would like to verify when they come for a inspection or monitoring. Not like the previous law, this law we just adopt last 15 October 2021. The investment project, when receive a registration certificate from us, they can implement the project right away without waiting the other paperwork from the other ministry. So they just go straight to the work. So this is the facilitation that we put in place. For the investment facilitation in the agriculture sectors, we have set up a agri-food investment desk at the Council for Development of Cambodia under my purview. We work this together with the Australian embassies to see how we can promote investment in agri-food investment, agri-food sectors that starting from agricultures until to the processing. So this facilitation mechanism will help all investment in agriculture sectors in Cambodia to get much efficient, more efficient work done to get their investment implement right away. We provide incentive to many sectors, including agriculture and agro industry. SMEs is also there. The previous law did not give incentive in those SME, but we put in the new law that SME linked with the agriculture sectors, they could also receive investment incentive. Green energy, green sectors is also part of that. The other very important point that we put here, the education and vocational training and productive with the promotion is also part of the investment incentive. Those investment that invest in agriculture, that they put R&D in that sectors will also receive investment incentive. What incentive that we give them? We give basic incentive with two options. The option one, we allow them to enjoy a income tax exemption for 3 to 9 years, but the agriculture is get the maximum 9 years without other consideration. The other sector might get 3, 4, 5, up to 9, but agriculture will get maximum 9 years right away. We give them a grace period for a 6 year when they finish a tax exemption of that 9 year. So for agriculture, they may have 15 years of tax exemption, but the last 6 years, first 2 years, they pay only 20% of 25% of the income with the progressive rate, 5% tax rate, normally 20%. The other 2 years, they pay 10%, it means 50% of the income. They will pay only 10% in total. The last 2 years will be 15% of the income. So I think the option one is a basic information incentive we provide together with the prepayment tax exemption during the income tax exemption period. So it means 9 years that agriculture sector, agriculture investment receive tax exemption. They don't need to pay prepayment tax. Prepayment tax is important here in Cambodia because company need to pay 1% every month to secure that the end of year they will have enough tax reserve for paying to the government. So now we abolish prepayment tax for the agricultures up to 9 years already. Also, minimum tax exemption is also given to the company that have a independent audit report. So if they want to get the minimum tax 1%, they can also do with the report that audited by the independent auditors. They also get the export tax exemption for the agriculture's product they want to export, and also other industrial product produced in Cambodia also can get that. The option two we give together with this prepayment minimum tax, export tax, is apply for those who invested in the capital intensive, that they use more machinery or equipment that very intensive to their capital. We allow them to do a special depreciation where we allow them to have a up to 40% at the first year and can follow by the accelerated depreciation. This will help them to secure the working capital for their investment project. And we also allow them to deduct up to 200% of the specific expenses. So this option two will allow to a company that use more capital intensive to their project. And we give
Mr. Suon Sophal, apologize, you have 3 minutes left.
Sure. I will finish very soon. The fiscal incentive very important because investment in agriculture, they need a construction material, construction equipment, production equipment, so on and so forth. And all of that we allow them to import with duty exemption. Also exempted from special income tax value added. We also give them additional tax, and that additional tax is very important to them to operate. Value added tax, VAT, is also exempted from the purchase of locally made production input. When they spend for the research development, providing a vocational training, construction accommodation, canteen, and other facility for a welfare of the worker, all those expense can be deduct 150%. This is very important for the investment that can do that. When they have a expansion QIP, the project, they can also get the income tax exemption. The previous law did not have this, but we put this in the new law. And this is the new policy that we work to attract a foreign investment in agriculture sectors. We even put a special incentive for them as well. See if the sectors in agriculture that they potentially contribute to national economic development, we will review annually and will give a special incentive in addition to what I explained in the basic and additional tax incentive earlier. We provide investment aftercare, and this is something I want to share with you, a non-discrimination treatment, providing no nationalization, no expropriation, no price control. We allow free transfers, and we give protection on the intellectual property. So invest in Cambodia, they are fully protected, fully guaranteed in terms of doing investment here, non-discrimination, only one related to land that is given to local people. They need a joint venture. So we also work to establish a mechanism to provide aftercare services for the investment. We help them to address all the matters, and I hope that policy could contribute to the bringing in the investment in agriculture to avoid a food security itself. And I think the ASEAN could work the same thing, and Cambodia very active in participation in the ASEAN negotiation with the other dialogue partner to make the investment regime more liberal, more protective, and give them non-discrimination treatment, and more on the facilitations and given the room for investment to grow in our region. I thank you for this opportunity to share Cambodia perspectives and how we put policy to promote investment and investment in agriculture in particular, and we will see more promising potential in these sectors in our economy in the future. I take this opportunity to thank Center for Indonesian Policy Studies for allowing me to share this perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suon Sophal, for giving us an overview of the Cambodia's approach on inviting and facilitating foreign investment in agriculture. We really appreciate your presentation. So now let's jump in directly into questions. We have several questions already, and I will post the first one to Mr. Suon Sophal again. There have been numerous FDIs entering ASEAN countries, but the question from Pak Satrio Santoso from Indonesia is there any particular state outside ASEAN that focuses on agriculture investment in the region? Since nowadays, FDIs focuses on infrastructure and healthcare issues. So from your observation, are there any states or region that have been focusing on the agriculture investment to ASEAN?
I thank you. I think the ASEAN have done a good move when we discuss how to liberalize the investment regime in the region to attract intra-investment, also foreign direct investment to the region. We see the trend that most of the member states liberalize more on the agriculture sector to welcome investment from outside. For Cambodia, I think when we work in line with promotion of the agricultural investment, we want a technology, research and development to spur the production of the agricultures in the countries to make sure that food securities have been in place before we think of exporting those to outside Cambodia. And if you look at the world world state, the food security is a point that everyone discuss, and we see a trend of food shortage somewhere. So I think the country should work to promote more on the agriculture sectors. That's why Cambodia put effort in establishing a mechanism to facilitate them to grow further. And when we talk about the protectionism for our economy, I think it's not the opportunity for the country to grow. We just use a traditional way of doing the agriculture. I think this is not productive at all. Invite more technologies in agriculture. I think this is something a region should move together, should work together, because when we have more productivity in agriculture, our economy will move further, because our farmer need to move from a traditional way of doing things to upper level of using technology. Think about the digital economy will come to the region. We cannot compete with the market that use digital know-how in research and development in agriculture sector. So why not open those sectors for partnership, and if not subsidy, incentivize them for them to put effort in research and development to make the agriculture to the greater health. Look at the experience of Israel and China. These two countries, Israel, when they come to those areas, the land is desert. So now they have agriculture product, even export to around the world. China, the same thing. I've been many provinces of China. I see the way they welcome technologies in agriculture and welcome investment in agriculture from the other country. I think ASEAN could do the same. We open economy on the sectors more wider and welcome the technology that we could not find in our economy. I think this way we can promote investment in agriculture for the benefit of our people. I don't think that Indonesia or other countries want their people still a farmer. They want their people living a good condition, living a life that do agriculture a season that can get the more lifestyle in their living. So I think it's the time that we should consider more on the investment in agriculture, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic like this. People face so many things in the supply chain and the manufacturing itself, that technology disruption prevent them not to grow further. The agriculture sector need only technology know-how, and we have enough potential in ASEAN to do better in agriculture sector. I hope that this can contribute to the understanding of how ASEAN country could work further on the liberalization of agriculture sector. For Cambodia, we open everything. We open 100%, except only the land that they can cultivate on. But they still have opportunity to get a long-term lease up to 50 years for agriculture project and can be renewable. I think this is a conducive environment providing to investment that they can contribute to our agriculture development, our region and country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suon Sophal. That's very encouraging to hear how Cambodia is taking the initiative and the extra effort to liberalize the investment conditions, especially in agriculture. Let's move on to the other question. This one goes to Azizah and Nisrina. From Pak Satrio, where is Indonesia's position today in terms of agricultural power or resources in Southeast Asia, especially comparing to other ASEAN countries? Noting that Thailand has always been a strong state with agricultural production, what's your reflection on Indonesia's agricultural production?
Okay, I'll start first. As other ASEAN countries, the proportion in agriculture investment in Indonesia is still low. It's still below 10%. It is low compared to other sectors. If we refer back to the graph that we showed earlier in our presentation, the proportion of agri-investment to Indonesia compared to other ASEAN countries is relatively high. However, most investments in Indonesia's agri sector go to palm oil sector.
Yeah, I would like to add to what Azizah said. My humble take on this question is that I agree that most of the production of agriculture in Indonesia is still dominated by the palm oil industry. Other sectors such as the horticultural sectors that includes the production of commodities such as fruits and vegetables that could provide the population with rich nutritious food is still relatively low, and this is also a research that was done by CIPS on FDI in the horticultural sector identified a low productivity too. So I believe Indonesia still has some homework to do to increase its agricultural productivity. And also one of the homeworks include, for example, increasing its land productivity through policies such as input subsidies, increasing the farmers' access to adequate input that are not only good for the yield but also the quality of their land. Yeah, that's my humble take. Maybe Aditya can add on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in terms of outward export and investment, I think, yes, as Azizah said, we are still a net exporter of agriculture, actually, but it is dominated by palm oil. On the other hand, also imports are still a significant part of Indonesian agriculture, even noting that we still have a large agricultural sector, although in recent decades, yes, its outputs have been leveling out and laborers are leaving agriculture, but it's still a large sector, and most of our food production are still produced domestically, and the government's policy supports this. Even when it requires huge subsidies and results in food prices that are often higher than the international prices, therefore affecting accessibility and dietary pattern. So if the question is how big of an agricultural power Indonesia is, yes, I think it's still quite big. And can we fulfill our needs domestically? I believe yes, if we try, we can. But the question is, at what cost? Yeah, I think that's my take.
Thank you very much, Aditya, Nisrina, and Azizah. I would like to invite all of the audience to ask questions or to provide feedback or comments. There are two ways that you can do this. You can either raise your hand or you can also post them in the chat box and I will read it out to our panelists. But feel free to raise your hand and unmute and speak to the floor as well. While we're waiting for more questions from the audience, I would also like to invite some of our participants to come in and share their experience or perspective. We have Mbak Ana Saleh from the Netherlands Embassy in Indonesia. Mbak Ana, if you're there, we would love to hear your perspective when you're engaging with Dutch businesses. Are there any appetite from Dutch businesses to invest in agriculture in Indonesia or in the region? And can you share a little bit of their experience?
Thank you so much, Mbak Pipa. It's very good to be here. I actually follow CIPS and also the studies very closely. I learned a lot from you guys there, and we use a lot the recommendations from your studies, also quite a lot in our work. Thank you so much for that. Actually, what I can share is different policies in different ASEAN countries are something that we are struggling for. And especially the implementation of the different policies on the investment in ASEAN is something that the private sectors really have to carefully study. While from the Netherlands side, the interest of the foreign relations, in particular in agri and food, is quite focused. We are focusing on what's so-called top sectors. We have 9 sectors that we need to prioritize, which is agri-food, water, health and life science and science, and chemicals, high-tech, energy, logistics, and then the last one is creative industries. Agri-food is always the top priority. In ASEAN, and the Netherlands is focusing on ASEAN 5 countries. They are Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Unfortunately, Cambodia is not yet in the picture, but it doesn't mean that our colleagues working in the region doesn't keep an eye of Cambodia. So beware of it as well. We had a special study last year on the opportunities for the Netherlands players in agri-food sector in ASEAN 5 countries. And based on the study, we have the guidelines which sectors are more restricted, which sectors and countries are more open. Basically, Vietnam and Indonesia is actually the most difficult countries to go. However, we can find our way there. In Indonesia, especially post-omnibus, we really have to take care of what we are doing, looking at the regulations again. Is there any new regulations? Is there any new preference? And you know, the regional regulations are another homework to do. Because I'm working on Indonesia specifically and on agriculture and food and all the nexus that is related to agriculture and food, such as the WEF, water, energy, alternative energy, and food. My input is basically for the bilateral relations between the Netherlands and Indonesia, and as part of the multi-stakeholders platform like the P4G, OECD, FAO, WFP, etc. Actually, the focus for the Netherlands, especially for Indonesia, is going along with the world's concern on the transformation of sustainable food system. And this is also one of the objectives that we are really working on jointly globally. Under this topic, the Netherlands is putting a lot of focus on food harvest losses, or maybe we call it a food loss. This is something that we tend to simplify than food waste, that starts being campaigned more intensely in Indonesia recently. Our thought from the Netherlands is, what about the loss at the farmers that really is high, especially in certain commodities in Indonesia, or maybe in the other developing countries? How to tackle this more strategically and more integrated? Because actually, if we are talking about food security, it already starts from there, from how do you choose the seeds, right? How
I think there might be some technical difficulties, but we will.
And yeah,
yes.
And what is really important is how do we not damage the environment? And in Indonesia at this moment, especially post omnibus law, for foreign actors, our struggle is real to advise them what's best to do, in which region you can go, which sector is best. And we have to really advise well. Breaking the law is not a recommended action. And we really have to study what's a go and no-go area. And that's very tricky. The negative list of investment is also another struggle, Mbak Pipa. As policies are scattered here and there in various counterparts organizations, and also adding to it the regional regulations and policies, and also maybe the policies on paper and on the ground, right? And especially if we want to really act properly, such as we want to get the consent of local people and indigenous people, or disadvantaged people, disadvantaged groups of communities that need to be empowered and also need to benefit from our cooperation and collaboration. This is really not easy. There are the struggle, and for me, because I have to advise wisely, properly, according to the law, according to the needs, meeting all the interests. I think it's a never-ending homework for me, knowing this country more and more every day. Really a very hard work to do, especially if we want to mix and match, because we are focusing on ASEAN 5, right? We want to mix and match. What about an interest that can be implemented in Indonesia and can go along with Indonesian interests that can meet also the other interests of Malaysia or Singapore or Thailand? How do we go from there? What is our approach? Oh, it's really is huge work to do, and I think that's why we tend to see the old suspects of investors, the old suspects of traders, because they are the ones that have found the way. And if we want to attract more and more investors from overseas, I think we really need to collaborate, all stakeholders, like the think tank, like CIPS, and like the embassies, business associations, foreign governments. I don't know how to do it, but I think there must be a way to do so, because sustainable food system, which is not only the production, but also the supply chain, the whole distribution channels, and the consumption. What do we have to do after the consumption? That's also something that we need to really look at carefully and more closely, I think. And that's our work plan in Indonesia specifically. Thank you, Mbak Pipa.
Thank you so much, Mbak Ana, for sharing that experience. I see Pak Suon Sophal raised your hand, so if you can give a quick comment, and then we will take another comment from Mas Abe with Pak Suon.
I appreciate very much the comment from Ibu Ana. I think very pertinent point that Indonesia and other could take up for consideration as well. I think one thing that I want to share further on how Indonesia could play important role in driving ASEAN as a region that promote investment in agriculture. I think this region, we eat almost the same food, but Indonesian delicacy is something the region should endure. This is something that very encouraging, that Indonesia should go regional and global in terms of promoting food in this point. With regard to how we open further in the investment agriculture sectors, I think perhaps a region should consider a guideline on a sustainable investment. If we have that guideline on the investment, sustainable investment that cover agriculture and other sector related to environmental and social responsibility, I think all of these things could move ASEAN to a further open agriculture sector for investment. So Indonesian, in the eye of Cambodia, Indonesia is one of the superpower in the region and the world. Why not initiate any idea that move a region into a way that sustainable investment is applicable in the region and bring into a policy making for the region to push forward promoting investment in agriculture. If we can do this, I believe the topic you put for discussion today on avoiding food security in ASEAN through investment in agriculture, I think it's the right answer to the need of the region to promote investment in agriculture itself. So sustainable investment from the viewpoint of having environmental impact assessment, social impact assessment, not to mention deep into indigenous people right in those particular activity in the investment. I think skill development, job creation for the local people, rights of a women in participating in entrepreneurship in agriculture sectors, investment. I think all of this could put together into a sustainable investment guideline. If not our other policy, but just focus on a guideline that we can do. Look at the OECD. OECD, they do that. They pursue this way of doing things, and all the country understand how sustainable investment contribute to a livelihood, bettering a livelihood of their local people. So they not afraid to open the sectors in agriculture for the benefit of their people. So Indonesia is a superpower. I call superpower. It's my respect to Indonesian government. You can love this, but for Cambodia, Alia Latas was the god of Cambodia. He's the one who brings peace to Cambodia. When you ask Indonesian people at that time, no one knows Indonesian. But if you ask, do you know Alia Latas? They are that he's the god. Bring peace for Cambodia. So when you bring peace to Cambodia, to the region, why not bring development concept? The development concept is to bring together for sustainable development. So
Yes.
this is, I want to say as in my last intervention, hopefully, Indonesia can do more to push forward the idea of working together to promote investment for the better futures of people in the region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Suon Sophal, for that observation, and hopefully we share that same hope. I want to go to Mr. Abe Arif Rizky Bahtiar. Maybe you can also share from the ASEAN Secretariat.
Yes, thanks, Felipa, and good morning, and on Swastiastu to Mr. Suon from CIP. I work for the ASEAN Secretariat, but here I'm in my personal capacity. But also, I will be happy to share some of the initiatives that ASEAN has done in terms of responsible investment, particularly on food and agricultural sector. First, I think I'd like to thank the CIPS team for the comprehensive presentation, including on the AIFS framework, and correct actually that in selected sectors, cooperations are non-binding, meaning that actually this is meant for the ASEAN member states to have some flexibility to implement the initiatives. So that's why some of the cooperation are non-binding, including on the guidelines such as on AIFS. But we also have a number of more binding as well as practical cooperation in terms of food and agriculture. For example, this year we endorsed the MOU on the implementation of non-tariff measures, and this is included a list of 107 tariff lines on food and agricultural products. So meaning this is meant to aim facilitate on trade on food and agriculture product as well as supporting our farmers. We also have the existing APTER or ASEAN +3 emergency rice reserve mechanism. So this is a rice reserve facility located in Thailand that provide rice reserve for selected for all ASEAN member states, and ASEAN member states could use this facility to have a rice reserve and ensure to have a food security in their country. And this year alone, we have distributed more than 5,000 metric ton of rice to countries that are heavily affected by not only by the pandemic, but as well as on natural disasters. Second is on investment on agriculture. Yeah, it's true. We work with FAO, and FAO estimate that we need about 5.2 billion per year alone in agriculture and rural development investment. And at the moment, the current level of investment within the region is insufficient, particularly on food and agriculture. So we work towards that and try to promote and facilitate investment towards food and agriculture sector. But it's also a challenge because now we see another area is improving, such as we receive a number of investment on digital economy, infrastructure related industries that attract investors to come to the region. The last point I'd like to highlight is on the involvement of young people to work in the agriculture sector. So I'd like to appreciate Cambodia for their initiative in providing vocational training for young people to participate on food and agriculture sector. In ASEAN, we've just started initiative with FAO to develop a pilot project in unlocking the potential for young agricultural entrepreneurs. We work with the FAO to develop the roadmap, including policy and advocacy activities, increasing responsible agricultural investment and supporting the implementation of the guideline of ASEAN responsible investment in the sector. So I think there are some of the key points that I'd like to highlight and happy to discuss with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mas Abe, for that overview. It seems like there are a lot of activities and efforts that has been conducted by the ASEAN Secretariat as well to promote the food security and agriculture sector in Indonesia. Thank you very much for that perspective. We are running short on time, unfortunately, at this moment. I know a lot of us still have burning questions, but we are at the end of our discussion today. We would like to thank our panelists today, Mr. Suon Sophal and Aditya Aditya and Nisrina and Azizah for participating in today's session. We also would like to thank all of the participants today for coming in and discussing their perspective around capital investment in ASEAN agriculture to mitigate future food crisis. Thank you to Mbak Anna, Pak Satrio for asking the questions, Mas Abe as well for sharing the insights. I think it has been quite an insightful and rich discussion where we talk about the challenges of investment in the region at the moment and the importance of liberalizing investment regulation to invite new investors and greater investment. But not only that, of having a sustainable investment guideline and possibly also harmonizing the investment regulations across the ASEAN member states to ensure that as the region, all of the member states will be able to attract investments and improve their food security and food system and agriculture. We really hope that we can discuss this issue in the future even further. I would invite all the audience to go to our website or follow our social media accounts because we will be publishing the paper from this that talks about the discussion today very, very soon. And just also as a reminder for all of us, the ASEAN Forum continues until tomorrow. On the last panel tomorrow, we'll be discussing strategic ways to create a safe digital economy in ASEAN with our colleagues. This is, of course, a very relevant topic. I think some of the previous panelists and audience have mentioned the importance of digital transformation, not just in agriculture, but in general in the economy. So if you are interested in that discussion, you can register through the same link as today for tomorrow's session when we will be discussing that in more detail. With that, I would like to again thank you everyone and hope to see you tomorrow. Have a great day and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.